What is a multipolar world? Essentially, it is a European hegemony that acts through its proxies, such as China, India, Iran, Brazil, Russia, some African countries, etc. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I want to talk about multipolar world a little bit, and it's heavily inspired by one video from Corbett Report, which I'll probably link in the description. However, I shall go a little bit further than the author of that video did. Still, the premise is pretty much the same, or at least very similar, okay? But I'm not gonna quote him, like I'm just gonna tell it from my own perspective, okay? So, what is the multipolar world? Well, firstly, we need to figure out how did we get here, meaning to 2026, so to speak, right? To the fall of the American empire, or hegemony, or whatever you prefer. Well, first, let's talk about what happened during the American hegemony. Specifically, a thing called decolonization. You know, that basically America kind of cut European tentacles from all over the world, right? So a lot of supposedly, you know, independent nations appeared. So, previous European colonies, namely, right? It was basically forbidden for Europeans to have colonies during the American hegemony. And that's why even there was this funny anecdote of when gross national product was introduced, right? See my video about how GDP is not important anymore, right? Because there was a proposal actually to move gross national product, right, by Europeans. Namely, like, whoever is producing, like, if he's your nationality or not, rather than, whereas gross domestic is like whether the product is within your borders, right? So obviously, I mean, GNP would be much higher for Europeans than for the Americans, for example. Nevertheless, anyway, decolonization, okay? Let's establish this. However, now that American hegemony is falling, right, it is very likely that some sort of a recolonization will happen, right? When Europe will once again spread its tentacles into the world, right? Some sort of reconquista will take place, right? The recolonization of the world. Roughly speaking, the Europeans, now that they're establishing their own hegemony, will need to somehow drag roughly 6 billion people from, you know, the global south, wink wink, into the European digital concentration camp, right? And the question is, how do you do it? Of course, you can simply conquer them militarily, roughly speaking. I mean, most of the world has near zero military power, but still, point number one towards this proposal, if you may call it that, like, why would you do this, right? It's inefficient. Like, military subjugation is inefficient, specifically when everybody has the internet and the mobile phone, right? Many more, much more efficient tools are available. And point number two against military conquest, a potential one at the very least, is that many things have changed actually culturally, right? You cannot really do the stuff you've been doing 100 years ago, right? Now it is not okay to subjugate other nations, period. Especially, I might add, if you are a white European, okay? So European domination kind of has to happen through some secondary means. And I think, this is, I guess, my idea, maybe I've read it somewhere and forgot the source, but anyway, my point is that European domination has to be essentially delegated to someone else, who is preferably also not as white, okay? Wink wink again. So this is exactly where the multipolar world comes in. So the poles we are talking about, like various nations in various parts of the world, which essentially colonize the rest of the world, are just European agents, you know, European periphery. They're acting on behalf of Europe. It's just that Europe itself will never admit it, okay? This is basically the idea. So the many poles of the world is just a euphemism for European periphery, really. And again, it already has a face, if you want to call it that, namely BRICS, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, right? And remember, by the way, that it's not just those 5 countries, at least anymore, but there are some others, including places like Iran, by the way, and Egypt. Like, Iran is also a member of BRICS, i.e. it's also under the control of Europe. So yeah, so these countries in the near future will act as executors of European world domination. And people will call it multipolar world, or they can call it whatever they want, honestly. And they're already doing that, actually. I mean, these countries. If you think that Chinese or Russian or Indian foreign policy is somehow independent, and maybe even is enacted in favor of the people in these countries, you must be very naive, actually. I mean, I'm looking at what happens in Russia, and, well, it's anti-Russian, like whatever they're doing for the last, well, honestly, more than 100 years, but, yeah. In the last 30, like nothing changed in this respect, okay? So these countries are simply doing Europe's bidding, alright? At least, whenever any conflict of interest arises, okay? So BRICS, or whatever the name for its future form will be, is just a bunch of thugs who would drag the people of the world into this global European concentration camp, right? So that's why many technologies of suppression and control are already being tested exactly there in the BRICS countries, okay? Things like, again, full-scale internet control, digital currencies like mass surveillance, suppression of the freedom of movement, for example, various social and racial policies, again, see the case of South Africa specifically, and China as well, right? Yeah, so the BRICS countries are at the forefront of all these experiments, okay? And this is exactly what Europe needs to establish its basically totalitarian rule in the world. It's just that it's gonna be maintained through these, you know, proxies. So this also has the added benefit, obviously, that Europe itself may remain sort of clean, you know, as a beacon of virtue, with their renewable energy, like fast trains, I mean, no air travel, right, etc., etc., etc. So all the dirt, both literally and metaphorically, would be moved to the periphery. Like it's China, Russia, etc., who's gonna get their hands dirty, right? So, and also remember the point I've made in my video, why Europe welcomes Muslims. See the link in the description. By the way, what we're talking about here, I've already said most of it anyway, right? This video specifically, I'm highlighting the point that what people usually mean by multipolar world, it just means European hegemony, really. Okay. Anyway, so a lot of this we've already talked about in my older video, how Europe will rule the world. See the link in the description. Yeah, so in the other video that I already mentioned about Muslims, we talked about how recolonization of the Muslim countries proper by the immigrants to Europe is going to happen sometime later, like maybe in 30 or 50 years, okay? So yeah, so basically the Muslim people who migrated to Europe are going to migrate back, you know, and establish like Muslim Israels in their lands or something to that effect. Already with a like European agenda pre-installed in them, roughly speaking, okay? Anyway, the last point I want to make here is that the collapse, once again, I've already made this point many times, but still worth repeating, that the collapse of American domination means also the collapse of the so-called free world, okay? So in the next, I don't know how long, 75, maybe 100 years, like however long the national states and their blocks exist, okay? So the world would not be free anymore in this time frame, okay? I mean, starting today, really, or even yesterday, the world will not be free anymore. So forget about the human rights, forget about the equality before the law, forget about the United Nations Charter, right? All of those things are obsolete already. Like we have already entered a different world, where all kinds of atrocities might take place. I'm not saying they would, but they definitely might. Or at least what would be perceived as an atrocity according to, you know, the values of the previous American world. But that's exactly the point, that it's no more, right? And now the rules are different, okay? Now we have this multipolar world rules where we have a bunch of tyrant states, such as, again, Russia, China, India, Brazil, whatever, which are gonna do nasty stuff, okay, to the people. On behalf of Europe, again. Yeah, so new values, instead of those like freedom, liberty, democracy, and like equality before the law. Now we will have something like safety/security, we'll have environment protection, we'll have justice, also social justice probably, and many others, right? So completely different set of values. Yeah. Well, hopefully it's understood. Okay. In case it isn't, I refer you to those earlier videos and the comment section if you wish. So, conclusions. What is a multipolar world? Essentially, it is a European hegemony that acts through its proxies, such as China, India, Iran, Brazil, Russia, some African countries, etc. This is really what the multipolar world is. It's when we ignore that Europe rules everyone and we just look at the periphery of Europe, namely countries like BRICS. Then we can talk about the multipolar world, though there is only one pole, really, and it is in Europe. Yeah. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.
If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.